Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today I'm joined by Svend McEwan-Brown and Esther Swift to talk about the East Neuk Festival, which celebrates its 20th anniversary this year. Hello, both.
Hi.
Oh,
Sven, you're the director of the festival, so can you tell us all about it?
Well, as you say, it's 20th year, actually. And this time in 2004, I was driving around, driven by my crazy chairman, looking at every possible space in East Neuk that we could imagine would be able to hold an event. And he's been going to the East Neuk since his baby years, and we still found an amazing variety of places that we could do stuff. So basically in the last 20 years we have been exploring places. We made a point about saying that every event had to have a reason for being in the place it was put into. So it's not just like, you know, gigs in pubs or anything. It's every time we try and think of a creative way to do things. And it's grown and grown. First year, it was about 700 people came, and the maximum we've had has been well over 20,000. It varies every year depending on, you know, what the size of the venues is, apart from anything else. And yeah, it's really exciting. It's really amazing to be reaching this landmark. I don't know if you know the stats about the survival of most festivals, but they're pretty depressing. Very, very few festivals actually go beyond their first year. So to get to 20 is pretty good. I don't think I'll be directing it for the 40th, but you know, there's plenty of stuff still to do. We start almost entirely from classical music, and ever since then we've spread our wings, much as many musicians in the last 20 years have as well. And I mean, you've not got to look very far in Scotland to find amazing musicians who are refusing to be labelled as one thing or another and are finding different ways of doing things. And I'm hoping that the festival is doing that as well. We're basically trying to find different ways to present the music, and just saying that music is music. Come along and enjoy it.
That's really interesting, and it's something I've been talking about quite a lot recently. And Esther, I don't know if you think that that's similar, is that there is the case of what used to be quite kind of strict boundaries between genres and styles of music, whether it be classical or world or trad, that all of which is going to be at the festival. But there's much more of a kind of crossing of genre and of collaboration between them. Is that something you think's the case?
yes, I'm so excited to be a part of that. Really, I think we're so lucky in Scotland to have this incredibly rich tradition, which you know is also very niche wherever you go. So in East Neuk and in Fife, it's obviously got a very particular. There's a very particular Scottish tradition along the coast there. In the west, it's completely different. In the Hebrides, it's completely different, and in the Central Belt, where I am based, again, it's totally different. And so to be a part of that scene, which is thriving, and I describe it as a very living tradition. You know, it's very much driven by society and the culture still, and it's not just kind of sort of staying put and talking about the same subjects that folk music has been talking about in the past. It's really moving with the times, which is really exciting. And I think it's great to see classical music and jazz music. I'm involved in both of those scenes as well as the folk scene, and it's really exciting to see how the tradition and I suppose how we keep culture alive generally in this country is being passed into those genres too, and actually how we're all starting to collaborate with each other and creating this really exciting new sound in this time where, you know, music is now so accessible, it's globally accessible. So to collaborate and to celebrate each other's diversity and like this beautiful color palette that we share is just, I think, really exciting. Like people like Anna Meredith, for example, is a huge inspiration to me. Sue Ali as a local hero here in Edinburgh, you know, and she is really engaged in the folk scene now too. And Anna Meredith obviously writes lots of dance music, but she's celebrated as a classical musician also, and she's just equally celebrated in both worlds. And same with like Fergus McCready, who I was working with for my album. Actually, you know, he takes folk music and he puts it into a very kind of, I suppose, like a very functional jazz language. Yeah. and he uses decorations that are like very West Coast traditional in his tunes. So anyway, yeah, basically I think it's just a really exciting time to be a part of the scene. And despite, as you've described, the challenges of the cuts, which I really feel for festivals and for promoters here and throughout the UK, I think despite all of these challenges, the music itself is really alive and well and really thriving. So
No,
I think
I absolutely agree with that. Sorry, Sven, what were you going to say?
I was just going to jump in and say it's funny just listening to the way that Esther was talking about the different traditions and everything puts me in mind, because one of the things that we are doing this year is we've had a long-term relationship with musicians from the countries that used to be Czechoslovakia, all of those countries. And this year, a whole load of them are coming, about 10 of them are coming across to play in different concerts, different combinations. And they've got exactly what we've got. They've got this amazing, vibrant, and very, very distinctive folk tradition and a classical sector, which has always been really receptive. I mean, going way back to the 1840s, 1850s, always been really, really receptive and inspired by that. And they had a political dimension, of course, as well, wanting to be independent from the Austro-Hungarian empire and whatever else, which perhaps you could draw parallels with. Depends where you're sitting on the spectrum. But it's an interesting thing. Scotland really does have that now more than almost any country in the world, I think.
That's very interesting as well. And have you seen that change, Sven, over the 20 years of the festival? Have you seen that develop?
I've seen it develop. There have always been musicians who have found ways to bring together different traditions. That's nothing new. I mean, you get, even in Scotland, if you just limited it to that, you can go back to the 18th century, 17th century, and find wonderful, wonderful classical music, if you want to call it that, because there's no other way of calling it, art music, which is fundamentally about the tunes. James Oswald, for instance, who was born in Crail, was always mindful of his traditions. And so that's been there a long time. But what we have seen, particularly in Scotland, I think, and maybe it's partly as a result of things like Celtic Connections, bringing together different organizations and being such a success so that so many people want to belong to it. There are more and more musicians, particularly on the classical side, who are not only hopping across the genres, but they're doing it imaginatively. Because there was a time when you would get famous folk musicians standing in front of a huge, great big orchestra, and because the sound guy only really wanted to hear the singer, you couldn't hear the orchestra at all, that kind of thing. So really that there was no point. It was just spending a huge amount of money for an inaudible visual aid, really. Whereas now you really do have organizations that are spending the time and the imagination to allow the creatives to do exciting new things. That's certainly a new thing. And Sua, as Esther says, is a great field leader, in my view, on that, because she really is. I mean, I don't know if there's a genre she hasn't played, but every time she does it wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I've spoken to quite a few jazz musicians over the last couple of years, and it's a similar thing. Fergus is a great example with folk, but you get some looking at hip hop, some going into kind of electronic music, and some with a kind of classical crossover as well. And it's just such a healthy and vibrant thing to see. And I don't think that was always the case in my experience. I think it was much more delineated lines of this is the musician I am, and and therefore self-categorization perhaps, or other people doing it. Esther, what's your involvement this year? We've got the big project. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be writing this music. It's the piece that I've been asked to write is going to be performed in the Scottish Fisheries Museum, which is right on the front. And it's performed right beside the Zulu herring fishing boat, which has been beautifully preserved by the Fisheries Museum. And it's been in the museum for 55 years almost. It went in there in the 70s, and it was saved by the Fisheries Museum, and a huge amount of effort was gone to saving it, of course, at the end of the fishing industry, which was petering out in the 70s, and the boat actually sunk. It sunk twice. It journeyed to Shetland earlier on in its career. She
Wow.
call her she because boats are female.
Yep.
And she was called Heather Bell to start with, and she started working in Fife, and then she made her way up to Shetland just before the war, and then she was made into a cargo boat during the war, and then she sunk, but then she returned down the East Coast and sunk again. She had a thriving career throughout most of the 1900s, but then she sunk again, and then she was saved by the Fisheries Museum. So you might have seen, I'm sure we've all seen the kind of old skeletons of boats that litter the coastlines of Scotland, which is kind of a beautiful thing, but also quite a sad thing, because it's very recent history actually, and marks a time in Scotland which was really exciting, kind of industrial, I think, particularly for families, for small industry, who lived along the coastlines and were able to get good work out of the fishing industry, but of course an unsustainable industry. And so the piece basically tracks this boat, which was renamed Research after it went to Shetland. So it was first called Heather Bell, and then it became called Research. And it tracks its journey from where it was built right up to Shetland, through this amazing North Sea, which is notoriously rough and challenging, meets the Atlantic and the North Sea, and there's this like collision. And I've taken that journey a few times, so there's some music about that particular journey in there. And then it comes back down, and it kind of tracks its journey through the fishing industry, and talks about, of course, the fishermen, but also the fisher lassies, who were just as important as the fishermen, and also talks about the other family members involved, because the whole family was involved. If there was a family involved in the fishing community, the whole family got involved. The kids were there to scare away the birds, and of course the women had to gut the fish, and they had their beloved gutting knives, and the men had to ask permission to be let into the house by the women, because the women were the purse holders traditionally. And so if they'd had a bad catch, if the fishermen had had a bad catch, they had to throw their caps into the middle of the room, through the corridor from the front door, and they had to wait for the wives to let them in. So that's some of the stories that I've just been getting really excited about whilst writing this piece.
It's amazing hearing you talk about that, because as someone who's not a musician, the idea of taking all that research and information and turning it into music, I mean, how do you even begin to start that?
Well, the truth is, Alistair, that there's so much music written about that time, during that time, but also about that time. I mean, there's Fisher Lassie songs. There's obviously lots of Shetland tunes, which are very particular to up there, and Walsey tunes, because the boat went straight to Walsey, which is an island on the east of Shetland. So there's a couple of Walsey tunes that I'm going to include, and of course I wanted to also get the sound effects of the time, somehow conjure that. And so we're really lucky, because we've been using lots of percussion instruments that were provided by St Andrews Music Society. Is that right? St Andrews University. And helped by Callum MacLeod, who is a teacher up there, and he's been incredible, providing us with timpani, with tubular bells, with gongs, with bass drums, with glockenspiels. And so we just had a great weekend there with kids from Stamp Orchestra, trying out all of these different percussion instruments and trying to conjure the sounds of the time. So for example, the boat building itself, this boat was built in the early 1900s. And so we wanted to create the sounds of the boat being built, and the sounds that would have been all along the coastline along that time, of boats being fixed and built, nets, like lots of industry, heavy industry, the gutting happening all along the coast at that time. And of course, another image which has really stuck with me is the mussels. There were so many mussel caves all along the coast, and so the mussel shells were just used as paths. Basically, people would just put the shells down on the paths, and so all of these mussel shell paths led down to the shore, which I think is a beautiful kind of both kind of visual thing, but also I think the sound of that is really cool. So there is no shortage basically of sounds and songs and tunes. So the main challenge for me has been narrowing it down, because it's a huge epic journey that this boat went through, and such a story that it has to tell. And just being beside this boat, which is huge, you know, beautiful and very beautifully preserved boat, it's got a resonance to it, and the wood already has this beautiful acoustic, which tells the story in itself. So yeah, it's pretty magical.
It sounds incredible. Sven, when you are going to get a musician like Esther to compose something like this, do you come with the idea, or is it all left up? Is there a kind of theme behind it?
I think there's a soup stage. So because I'm also the fundraiser, I'm putting together the funding applications 2 years before the festival. So often you can't go to a fundraising situation saying, yeah, we're gonna put some stuff on. So I do have to come up with some very enticing ideas. So when I first wrote to Esther, I had this stuff which I'd put in my funding applications, and we took it from there really. But it's what's come out is not exactly what I put into the funding application, which is fun. I think we had Japanese poetry and darkness mostly to start with, so you can tell it's gone quite a long way. But it's one of the great pleasures of doing this job is creating the opportunity and then watching to see what comes out. That really is why people like me do this job, rather than trying to, well, apart from the fact that I couldn't write music if I tried, that's what I get out of it. So the joy of this particular, because this is the 12th big project we've done.
Okay.
And each time because the thing about the big projects is they have to be open to all levels of community participants that want to participate. And they also have to be inspired by the local landscape or history or whatever it is. And we've not run out of stories yet. So we've had mining, we've had fishing, we've had hunting, we've had historical personalities inspiring these projects so far. And every year the composers have just that they've brought so much to it, but also I think the composers get quite a lot out of it. I mean, Esther can back me up or deny this, but it just seems to me that working in this kind of situation where there are so many individuals that want to contribute within the framework of what you have in your own conception is very, very stimulating. And also in this particular case, having as a brilliant partner the Scottish Fisheries Museum, who have let us, I don't think this is giving anything away, but nearly all of the performers will be under the boat. So that's obviously quite exciting. If you're a kid, that's quite exciting, isn't it? You're going to get you're going to go and thrash the hell out of a drum, and B, you're going to be under a boat. So, you know, why wouldn't you?
Yeah,
a little bit of jeopardy there as well, I guess. I was wondering, Esther, when you said the acoustic of the boat is amazing, I was thinking, you're not going to be sitting in it, are you? That seems so. That's where it comes from. It's been performed kind of underneath this.
exactly. Yeah, right beside the boat. There's also a number of smaller sailing boats beside us as well. So we're kind of around on the fake sea, which was very realistic, I have to say. We're just kind of around like these little boats beside this huge boat, and there's this really great lighting, which is kind of lighting up the boat and drawing shadows on the side of the drum as we're playing the drums.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a pretty epic space, and I think all the shadows and the kind of the fact that we're below the audience is going to look really intriguing as well, because it's kind of like we're looking into the bows of the boat.
Sven, it'd be nice, I think, to hear, because that does sound incredible, and it's amazing to think we're not just talking about this one performance, because it does sound amazing. But can you tell us a bit about what else is on at this year's festival?
Sure. Now just stop me, won't you, when you've heard enough? Basically, what we're trying to do with the festival at the moment is, as I said, we grew out of primarily classical background. In fact, before there was us, there was a series of concerts that the Scottish Chamber Orchestra used to do in Fife for a weekend. So we grew out of that. And as time's gone on, we've discovered that two particular towns are particularly rich in venues that we can work with. And one is Crail and one is Anstruther. And Crail has got this beautiful medieval church, which is the heart and soul of what we do there. And that is somewhere that the classical musicians absolutely love. They love the acoustic and they love the way that they can connect with the audience, that it's very intimate but still spacious. Whereas Anstruther has got something like 5 different halls. Each of them are a really nice size for mid-scale to intimate, traditional music, world music, roots, global music, anything you want to think of. And so we've taken the opportunity to try and develop the festival so that in Crail you get mostly your classical stuff. And we've got fantastic musicians coming this year, starting with Hisako Kawamura, who's a wonderful Japanese pianist who's coming to play some European and some Japanese music, and working through to the Pavel Haas Quartet, who were recently called the most exciting quartet in the world, and also a young Scandinavian quartet called Opus 13. So they perform the kind of backbone of what we'll do there. And meanwhile, in Anstruther, we've got another harpist as well as Esther, who's Katrin Finch, who's playing a really wonderful fusion. And then we also have this astounding bass player called Runo Garcia Fons, he's been with us quite a few times because I've been a fan of his for decades. He plays the double bass like you wouldn't believe. I mean, it's the most beautiful thing that you can possibly hear. And he's put together like a quartet of musicians from around the Mediterranean. So we've got Turkish and Spanish, we've got flamenco, we've got the French Mediterranean basin as well, and Algerian and Moroccan influences coming into it as well. So it's kind of like a pan-Mediterranean show. So Anstruther's pretty varied on that front. You've got Mediterranean, you've got Esther's show, you've got Katrin's show, and then you've also got Julian Bliss, who's one of the world's great clarinetists, coming to do a show with his septet, playing a load of Gershwin. So in a way, it's a kind of a, there's something for everyone's show. And then finally on the Sunday, we have some silent movies, in case you're feeling bored. I'm afraid that is sold out, so it's already only returns only, but we wanted to do something about golf. My chairman thinks that golf and music have some kind of link. Not, hell. So Neil, a brand who is this amazing silent movie pianist, has gone off and found films from the silent era all about golf. And he's found Charles Chaplin and Laurel and Hardy and all kinds of stuff. So that's going to be amazing. And then finally, big finale will be the SCO with their wonderful chief conductor, Emalyanichev. And I'm sure a lot of your viewers will know that he's an amazing pianist as well as a conductor. So he's going to start with a huge improvisation and then just go straight into a Mozart concerto. It'd be lovely, be great.
It sounds absolutely fabulous. We should let people know the best place to find out and get tickets. What's the best advice for that?
Well, if they go onto our website is the short answer, which is eastneukfestival.com. Tickets are on sale online through the website or from the Fringe box office in Edinburgh. And if there are tickets left for the event, they'll also be on sale on the door.
Right, okay, that's great. And I'll put all the links to those things on the website as well, so people can find them very easily once they've listened to this. Esther, this is always a tricky question, but is there anyone in particular you're looking forward to at this year's festival?
Well, I mean, the whole program sounds phenomenal, really diverse, really interesting. But I have to say, I'm a huge Catherine Finch fan, and her technique is kind of just unbelievably beautiful and perfect, and her classical training is stunning. But she also interweaves traditional Welsh music into, and she's done lots of collaborations with Welsh music. And so as a harpist, that's my that's my main excitement, is going to see her show, because I love her, her combination of extremely high classical training with her Welsh roots. I think that's really wonderful.
Fantastic. And I'm going to ask you the same thing, Sven, but I will understand if you choose to plead the fifth, since you're putting all these things on.
Yeah, it's not a good idea, is it? I mean, Esther's project is the top choice. But no, I mean, the great thing about this job is that there's nothing in this festival that I don't feel passionately about. So no, it's going to be 5 days of joy for me.
And is it, I mean, I was thinking, as the festival begins to get closer, is it excitement? Is it anxiety? Or how do the feelings come out for you, Sven? Or is it just joy because you know you've done this long enough now to know this is going to work?
Yeah, it's a strange one because I've got a cracking team behind me and everybody's doing the work and, everybody's at it. And in some ways, my work stops when the brochure goes to press because I can't do anything else. But nonetheless, I found myself waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning. So there's obviously something kicking in there, which I don't really understand. But no, it's a really strange one. So next week, no, I'll mostly be smiling at funders.
And just as an aside, we were speaking before we started recording how 20 years ago you would get press cuttings and there would be things in newspapers and all of that stuff, and how that has changed. So I guess it is more difficult to get the word out there in the traditional sense, perhaps. Maybe there's new ways of doing it, but is that something you've found?
It is, and it is very, very interesting, because at the same time that has happened, ticket sales have increased. So the old idea that unless you were in the paper, people didn't know what was going on is no longer true. We actually have our best sales this year ever. And we had the greatest struggle getting any press coverage. So I guess the message to the press is that they should be more interested in us and the other festivals, because actually people are interested in us.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it seems to me there are a lot of festivals still managing to hold on, even though it's tricky times, but they hardly get any kind of mainstream media, for want of a better term, coverage. And it is through either word of mouth or people have been before, or people who mention it online.
I also think that post-COVID, people are looking for it more. Yeah. I was just down at a festival down south this weekend, and they are 97% sold. And never had that before. So I think there's something changed in the culture, and in a way, the press is the traditional press is. I guess they're so obsessed with the mainstream. So none of them had any trouble finding column inches to cover Taylor Swift. Yeah. But they have a lot of trouble covering what's happening on their doorstep year round. So, I mean, I'm not going to be bitter about it because we're doing fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good. And Esther, I should mention that you've got a new album out, if you don't mind just briefly talking about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I would love to.
So yeah, Expectations of a Lifetime. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Of course. So the title track comes from a track which I wrote just coming out of my pandemic, after I had reflected on what my expectations were for my own work going forwards. And I suppose going back to some of the themes that Svend was talking about, community-based project, local projects, celebrating local art and what is on our doorsteps, and collaborating with people who are here with us, is just something that I really reflected on a lot during the pandemic. And I suppose I wanted to really focus my own expectations on that. And so the title track is really about community and kind of friendship and the power of collaboration at your doorstep. And there's quite a lot of tracks that are written in different parts of Scotland on there. Blue was written at Hogmanay, coming home from the Isle of Lewis, during a scene where it was pre-dawn, and it was kind of this beautiful frozen blue. Everything was frozen blue, and I watched the fishing boats and the seabirds kind of come into this dance of fishing as we were crossing the water. And then the opening track, which is called Opening, was written up Winnie Hill. Just, I can actually see it from my flat. It's just in Holyrood Park here in Edinburgh. And the last track is actually a poem setting by W.B. Yeats, who wrote The Lake of Innisfree, which I believe is just so timeless. It still feels all the more relevant today with kind of various conflicts happening around the world, and that kind of call for freedom and call to nature, and solace that nature can bring us through these challenging times, and the solace that community can bring us to. So that's something in the album.
And there's an Edwin Morgan poem. As soon as I saw that was the case, you had me at that, I have to say.
Yeah, I love him so much. Honestly, he's such an inspiration. He has huge inspiration to me. I think like his chameleonic approach, his playfulness, his like just his gentle courage throughout his whole life, and desire to kind of push the boundaries, but in a very playful and approachable way, is just like hugely inspiring. And I was really lucky to be commissioned by the Edwin Morgan Trust to set a couple of his works to music during the pandemic, actually. So I was able to really delve into that. I love doing that.
Fantastic. And actually, the album itself kind of feeds into what we were talking about earlier in regard to the festival, because there are collaborations on them, quite a few different collaborations on the album, and with different types of musicians from different genres as well, which is, having discussed the festival, that is kind of the umbrella about it, isn't it? That you've got, as you say, Sven, something for everyone, something for every music fan there.
There is. And also, actually, I'm a great believer in jump in and try something different. You never know, you might find you love it. Because I do know so many people, and we can see it in our ticket sales. There'll be people that will buy all of the Anstruther shows, but none of the Crail shows, and vice versa. But there is a growing band in the middle. There's about 20% in the middle who go to everything. And they're the ones I really love.
Yeah, and that's, I think, when you've been doing a festival as long as you have, you'll get repeat visitors who come to trust the program.
That's the dream. I think every year, yes, you hope that's the dream, and but I think it's a dangerous thing to tell yourself.
Okay, yeah, you keep that distance, never get too complacent. I completely understand. Sven and Esther, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. All the best with the festival and with Zulu and the album. It all sounds fantastic. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you
so much.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.